Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In today's video I'm going to be having a go at the very popular dotting technique, but instead of using acrylic paint I'm going to be using UV resin, and instead of just doing dots I'm going to be having a go at lines and swirls and zigzags and anything else that my mind got carried away with. So if that sounds interesting, stay tuned and enjoy the video. Before I could begin with my UV patterns, I needed to prepare my mould, and for this I needed to add just enough epoxy resin to cover the base of each cavity. So they're about half full with JDiction's 4-hour epoxy resin. The mould I'm using here is from Moulds and Shapes, and I will also be using my tag mould from Moulds and Shapes. The reason I need an epoxy resin base for my UV resin patterns is because I'm going to be applying chameleon powders on top of the tacky UV patterns, and if I just did that straight onto the silicone, the powders would stick to the silicone and it would be a nightmare to clean up the base of the mould. And the reason I'm using epoxy resin for the base and not UV resin is because it's just more cost effective to do it that way. Once the background layer was cured, it was time to get started. Today I'm using JDiction's high viscosity UV resin along with chameleon pigment powders. The reason I'm using the high viscosity UV resin is because it's a little bit thicker and easier to control. It doesn't move as quickly as regular UV resin, so your pattern stays in position where you want it without running around all over the place. For my first two coasters, I decided to do swirly lines before I got onto the dotting of the second coasters. The dotting needs a lot more control, and I felt like because this was new to me, I wanted to get a little bit warmed up, get a feel for the UV resin, see how it flows before I do something very controlled. So my first one is very much freestyle really, and it's always good to have a practice with something nice and easy before you go on to the more delicate projects. So before I got started I made sure I had everything to hand, so I wasn't hunting around for things at last minute, which is what I usually do. So I've got my small brush for applying the powders, I've got my UV lamp and a larger soft brush for clearing up the excess powder. Each bottle of the JDiction UV resin comes with an optional fine point nozzle, so I've added that to my bottle and it makes it really easy to make your patterns with that nozzle on. And once I'd drawn my first wavy line, I put it under the UV light for about 20 seconds. The reason I only did it for around 20 seconds was because the resin needs to be tacky so that the powders will stick to it, and JDiction resin is actually not very tacky when it's fully cured. Some UV resins are tacky, which can be a bit of a pain, but the JDiction UV resins are very smooth when fully cured, but I needed them to be tacky, so that's why I was only curing it for around 20 to 30 seconds. And now it's time for the most fun part, which is adding the pigment powder, and this is where you'll see the pattern come to life. I'm using the Let's Resin chameleon powders, and with those comes this little brush, and I'm just dipping the little brush into the powder and applying it on top of the tacky UV resin. Once you've applied your powders, you need to brush away the rest with your big soft brush. Any excess powder will probably stick to the sides of the silicone mould, which is fine with me. Now, I was expecting by using the epoxy background that the excess powder wouldn't cling to it. I was kind of wrong. It did cling a little bit. Not as much as it would have done if I'd gone directly onto the silicone, but there was still an like a static attraction to that background, and yeah, it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. But what I did find was that using my gloved finger to wipe it, it wiped it away. So yeah, it didn't completely stick. It was just a case of wiping it with my gloved finger, and that did seem to do it mostly. But yeah, it was not as easy as I was expecting that part would be. Anyway, my plan was to just fill half of the coaster with the pattern, and so the part that's not going to have any pattern on, I just left messy until I was finished and then cleaned all that up at the end. And so for the swirly pattern, that's basically everything you need to know. So what I'm going to do now is speed it up and let you just see the good bits very much faster than if you'd see it in real time. Okay then, so I did the same thing for the second coaster, and then I started my dotty patterned coaster, but for the first line I forgot to press record, as usual. It's just like me, isn't it? But anyway, I remembered just in time to show you the next bit. Now, as you can see, I've started with a large dot and then let my dots get smaller and smaller, and at the moment I'm just clearing up the mess that I left, and just as before, leaving one side messy until the end because I'm only doing one half of the coaster. Right then, so when you're making a dotting pattern, you have two options. You can use it directly from the bottle, or you can use a dotting tool for your UV resin. I actually do quite like using it straight from the bottle, but sometimes, especially if you're making a very small dot, you will need to use a dotting tool. But you'll see that soon. But for now, I'm using the bottle, and it's just a case of either squeezing it very gently or a little bit harder, and you do actually get really good control by just using the bottle. As you can see here, it's just a case of gently dropping it on to the background layer of epoxy resin. I would say the most important tip I can give you when doing this is after each dot, make sure you lift up your bottle enough to make sure the stream of UV resin is broken, because if you rush, you will find you'll get a little fine line joining your dots, and you can't even see that you've done it until afterwards when you apply your powder, and you'll see a little line joining them all because you haven't lifted your bottle or your tool up high enough to break the stream of the UV resin. Anyway, here I have a dotting tool, and yeah, you'll have seen them before, won't you? You can get them for nail art and for all different purposes, but they're really good for dotting. I'll leave a link in the video description. And I've put some UV resin just into a separate silicone, it's actually a cupcake silicone thing. Can't think what they're called. Cupcake case. Silicone cupcake case. And that's what I was holding my UV resin in as a palette. But do remember to put it out the way when you use your UV light, otherwise it will get cured. And so yeah, you dip it in and very gently make your dot that way. And really, I wish I had set up another camera at the side so you could see a better angle of what I'm doing. Next time, if I do this again, I will do that so you get a better view. When you purchase your set of dotting tools, you'll get all different sizes, so you can have, the world's your oyster as far as how big you want your dots to be. You can get them in all sizes and do big dots or tiny dots, and you do get a good amount of control by using the dotting tools. The circles are more perfect with the tools than they are with the bottle, I would say. So once again, I'm going to speed it up because it did take quite a lot of time. I repeated the process for the second coaster and we'll come back to that in just a minute, but first of all I wanted to show you my tag mould. When I did my background layer for my coasters, I had some resin left, so I half filled some of these cavities in my tag mould so that I was going to be able to have a practice. And everyone needs practice, especially me. It's a very new thing for me, this kind of thing. So here you can see I've added a big dot, and what I'm trying to do is drag it with the tool to make a teardrop shape. And it's not as easy as I thought it would be, and that's why I need a lot of practice. I got there, but it's not a very tidy teardrop. I think, do they call it a swish or a swoosh or something like that in dotting? I'm not up to date with all the dotting terminology, I do apologise. Anyway, whatever its name is, I don't care. I did lots more of them, and I think I got a little bit better as I went along. I think if you can kind of try different tools, different size tools to do the dragging part, that helped. I think my tool was a little bit big. If I'd have used a smaller one, I could have got much better detail. But yeah, I did that, and then I covered it in the chameleon powder and then did a few little extra bits of swooshing and it was done. And what I did was, off camera, I did loads and loads because I'd kind of filled so many. I didn't quite realise how long it would take me to do them all, but yeah, I came up with loads of different ideas and I will show you the results in just a minute. But first we need to fill up the moulds, and I'm using epoxy resin again, and I decided to go with darker colours. I thought the pattern would show up better with dark colour. In actual fact, I'm not sure if I was right. You'll see in a minute what I mean. But anyway, the colours I chose are from, this one is from Laura's Art Corner. It's one of her own colours, which is one of my favourites. I think it's called Deep Hyacinth Blue, And look at it. Isn't that a gorgeous colour? I'll put a link to that in the description. So yeah, I did those two in the deep hyacinth blue. And for the other ones, I wanted to see what black would look like. But I didn't want a harsh black, so I used a black pigment powder from Arteza, and it was just a bit softer, a little bit of a glittery effect to it. You know, just I think black can sometimes be a little bit harsh, don't you? And with these pastel colours, I thought it would just be too much if I used a simple black opaque pigment. Now, normally what I would do at this stage is show you the demoulding, but there were so many, I decided to just take photographs of them and show you the photographs. And so here we have it. There's the first one. I photographed it with one of the tags that I'd made that went really well with it, and I think the background colour also works well with these colours. But what do you think? It looks quite good, doesn't it? Jazzy, that's what my mum would say. They're a bit jazzy. And here are the other ones, the dotty ones, and I think they're great too. I love the way you get the 3D effect. It almost looks like those dots are pointing upwards rather than inwards, but yeah, it's a bit of an optical illusion, but I love them. I think they're so pretty. And I took a few photos just to demonstrate how it changes in the light. You get a very different effect depending on how the lighting is. And now here are my practice pieces. Some are better than others, but it was a really good process to go through because I really got a feel of what worked well and what didn't work so well. And also with the background colours, I think the light colour actually works better. The creamy colour just made the pattern show up better in some cases. So yeah, I suppose it depends which colours you've used for your pattern. And as you will have noticed, I painted the edges with my silver chrome marker and some of them with a gold marker pen, and it really seems to smarten them up, I think. So we're approaching the end of the video, and I would like to thank you very much for watching. And if you've enjoyed the video, please do give it a thumbs up because that helps me immensely, even more than subscribing, because it means more people get to see the video. So please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed and you would like to, please do. That would be great also, and I will see you again next time. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.